Here's what's coming up on the world today. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he will not give up on his pursuit of a ceasefire in Gaza. 4 injured in a Russian ballistic missile strike on Kiev. Plus, Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet seeks to boost ties on first Vietnam visit. Happy new weekend and thanks for joining us on this hour. I'm Susan Ilian. Amidst a turbulent 24 hours in Gaza, footage shows displaced people in Jabalia refugee camp fleeing from smoke bombs. People said that Israel deployed the smoke bombs to force them out of their shelters. As the smoke billowed from tents, individuals moved through the camp with hands covering their mouths. Israeli tanks sought to push further west in their battle against Hamas in and around Khan Yunis, the primary city in southern Gaza Strip. According to Gaza health authorities, approximately 18,000 people have been killed by Israeli attacks, with 49,500 sustaining injuries. Approximately 100 of the Israeli hostages were freed during a week-long truce that ended on December 1st. Hamas has issued a threat that no hostages will be allowed to leave Gaza alive unless its demands for a prisoner exchange are met. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, claims dozens of Hamas fighters are laying down their weapons and handing themselves over, describing the situation as the beginning of the end for the group. Earlier, Mr. Netanyahu rebuffed international calls to end the Gaza conflict, deeming them inconsistent with the goal of eliminating Hamas. During a briefing to his cabinet in Jerusalem on Sunday, Mr. Netanyahu said he had told leaders of France, Germany, and other countries that pressuring Israel to agree to a ceasefire would impede the elimination of Hamas. Netanyahu thanked U.S. President Joe Biden for his administration's veto of a UN Security Council resolution urging a ceasefire in Gaza. He also expressed gratitude for its approval of a shipment of ammunition for the Israeli army's use. Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi has accused Israel of implementing a policy aimed at displacing Palestinians from Gaza, asserting that the ongoing conflict meets the legal definition of genocide. Israel rejected these allegations, describing them as outrageous. Giving an update on Israel's offensive in Gaza, Israeli government spokesperson Ilan Levy said the artillery corps was, for the first time, operating inside the Gaza Strip, striking targets in Gaza's city Shijaya district. In the north of Israel, Levy added that the Israeli Air Force also struck a series of Hezbollah locations after suspicious aerial targets had crossed over from Lebanon, with 2 being intercepted. The exchanges of fire between Israel and Hezbollah, a heavily armed group backed by Iran, have marked their worst hostilities since the 2006 war, although the violence has largely been contained to the border area.
Course, outrageous and false accusations. Israel is fighting to defend itself from the monsters who perpetrated the October 7th massacre, and the purpose of our campaign is to bring those monsters to justice and ensure that they can never again hurt our people, as Hamas has been using the Gaza Strip over the last 16 years in its reign of terror in order to hurt the people of Israel. As we do that and we go after the Hamas monsters responsible for the October 7th massacre, we are urging civilians to get out of harm's way to the designated safe zone. Over the past day, ground, air, and naval forces have struck over 250 terror targets in Gaza. We have been locating and destroying weapons, conducting targeted raids, and of course, destroying underground terror tunnel shafts. For the first time this war, the Artillery Corps has been operating inside the Gaza Strip, striking terror targets in Shijaya, including booby-trapped houses and weapons depots. An update from the northern front. The IDF continues to repel and deter Hezbollah aggression from Lebanon. The Air Force has struck a series of Hezbollah targets, including operational headquarters. Following sirens in the western Galilee in northern Israel, the IDF identified and successfully intercepted suspicious aerial targets entering into our airspace from Lebanon. 2 IDF soldiers were moderately injured, and others sustained light injuries from shrapnel and smoke inhalation. The injured soldiers were evacuated for medical treatment. IAF fighter jets have been targeting Hezbollah terror sites in Lebanon, including infrastructure, launchers, and military compounds. Additionally, the IDF thwarted a terrorist cell attempting to launch anti-tank missiles near Zar'it in northern Lebanon. Ongoing IDF operations continue to target Hezbollah in Lebanese territory, and we reaffirm what we have been saying since day one, that the state of Israel is not interested in a war on 2 fronts, and that if Hezbollah chooses to drag Israel into a full-scale war that we are trying to prevent at this point, the consequences for Lebanon and for Hezbollah will be severe.
In the meantime, Israel's chief military spokesperson has offered an explanation for images circulated by the media depicting detained Palestinian men stripped down to their underwear. During his daily briefing to the media, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari stated that the pictures represented a routine security procedure aimed at ensuring that detainees were not concealing hidden explosives. He added that this practice is rooted in historical wartime experiences where individuals have detonated explosives on their person during encounters with military forces. The International Committee of the Red Cross expressed concern over the images, emphasizing that all detainees must be treated with humanity and dignity in accordance with international humanitarian law. Qatar's Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, is warning that an entire generation in the Middle East is at risk of radicalization because of the war in Gaza. Speaking at the Doha Forum in Qatar, Mr. Al Thani added that Doha will continue to pressure Israel and Hamas for a truce, despite harrowing and narrowing chances. Qatar, where several political leaders of Hamas are based, has been leading negotiations between the group and Israel. The foreign minister of Jordan and the Palestinian prime minister, among others, also addressed the forum.
The region. And
the region being seeing these images right now that's coming out of Gaza every day is not just affecting those forces which are in Lebanon, Yemen, or in Iraq, but it also affects an entire generation that might be radicalized because of these images, and seeing the international community not responding responsibly to it. We will continue pressuring the parties, despite each party aims to destroy the others. At the end, we know that the resolution will only come through the table. Right now, maybe the openings are narrower than where we were before the last pause. Yet there are still an opening. We are still continuing our talks. We are still continuing our efforts. We are hoping to go back to the agreement that we have brokered a couple of weeks ago.
If you go around the region and you talk to the younger generation who are waking up to those atrocities every day, Israel has created an amount of hatred that will haunt this region, that will define generations to come, and therefore it's hurting its own people as much as it is hurting everybody else in the region.
If Israel is above international law, I think Israel should be put on sanctions. Israel should not be allowed to continue violating international humanitarian law, international law, United Nations resolutions.
We definitely have failed the Palestinians so far, and the dehumanization dimension is a worrying trend, because this has made the unbearable bearable for the international community, has made the unbearable we see continuously on the news bearable again.
Staying with the Doha Forum, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has vowed not to give up his pursuit of a ceasefire in Gaza. Mr. Guterres also warned that the humanitarian situation across the Strip is becoming more dire. Meanwhile, Israel stated it will continue what it calls a just war aimed at eliminating Hamas.
The horrific attacks by Hamas on 7 October, followed by the relentless Israeli bombardment of Gaza, were met by a resounding silence from the Council. After more than 1 month, the Council finally passed a resolution which I welcome, but that delay comes at a cost. The Council's authority and credibility were severely undermined. And the resolution is not being implemented. I said that we are facing a severe risk of collapse of the humanitarian system. The situation is fast deteriorating into a catastrophe with potentially irreversible implications for Palestinians as a whole and for peace and security in the region. And I reiterated my appeal for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. Regrettably, the Security Council failed to do it. But that does not make it less necessary. So, I can promise I will not give up. Beyond the Security Council, global governance is failing to manage two existential threats. First, climate. We need far more ambition to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and ensure climate justice. Despite promises and pledges, our climate is in breakdown. Emissions are at an all-time high, and fossil fuels remain their major cause.
Meanwhile, the United Nations is urging countries to collaborate in addressing threats to human rights such as war and pollution. Speaking at an event in Geneva marking the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that risks being overshadowed by the Israel-Hamas conflict, UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk says he views the event as a call to hope and a call to action. In its communications regarding the two-day event, Mr. Turk's office has opted not to use the term celebrate and instead used the word mark to refer to the anniversary. The event was attended by ministers, diplomats, rights activists, and defenders.
And so I view today's event as a call to hope and a call to action. At a time of so little solidarity and so much divisive and short-sighted vision, I view it as a call to overcome polarization, a call to work with courage and principles together to resolve the huge challenges that we face. We live among such failures today, with the turmoil and suffering that they produce. War. My thoughts go to the millions of people suffering unbearably in the occupied Palestinian territory, notably Gaza and Israel, in Sudan, Ukraine, Myanmar, and so many other places. Famine, oppressive and hateful discrimination, repression and persecution, threats to human rights generated by climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. These are profound and interlocking challenges that stem from the failure to uphold human rights.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is condemning Israel's use of the Hamas's terror attack on October 7 as unacceptable justification for the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. He's calling for international monitoring on the ground in Gaza. Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly attributed the war between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas on the failure of years of U.S. diplomacy in the Middle East, while aiming to position Russia as an important player with ties to all the major actors in the region.
We strongly condemned the terrorist attack against Israel on the 7th of October, like we condemn any terrorist attack. At the same time, we do not believe it's acceptable to use this event for collective punishment of the millions of Palestinian people with indiscriminate shelling of the civilian quarters. The Americans and other Western countries, they did not support that resolution, and eventually they organized the Security Council to pass a decision, a resolution, which called, not demanded, but called for humanitarian pauses. This resolution is better than nothing, but even this weak appeal we cannot see materialized because to do this we need some kind of monitoring on the ground. I think everybody can understand and can agree that this happened not in a vacuum, and I referred to the decades and decades of blockade, decades and decades of unfulfilled promise that the Palestinians would have a state, living side to side with Israel in security and good neighborliness. I cannot, it's about cancel culture. Whatever you don't like in the events which led to a situation, you cancel.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasized that the United States is actively working to protect civilians as the war between Israel and Hamas rages on. His comments followed an earlier statement where he called it imperative for Israeli military operations to prioritize the protection of Palestinian civilians. Blinken also noted that the U.S. is in nearly constant contact with the Israelis to ensure they understand what their obligations are.
First, we're trying to do everything we can to ensure that civilians are protected, that humanitarian assistance gets into people who need it in Gaza. We are deeply, deeply aware of the terrible human toll that this conflict is taking on innocent men, women, and children, and we're working to minimize that to the greatest extent possible. We are in almost constant discussions with the Israelis about to ensure that they understand what their obligations are, to make sure that we understand how they are using whatever arms we're providing to them, as well as more broadly. I can't evaluate a specific instance in the moment, but I can tell you we're looking at everything.
The impact of the Israeli-Hamas conflict on Gaza's healthcare sector has been catastrophic. That's according to the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus. Dr. Ghebreyesus, who was speaking at an emergency board meeting, added that conditions are ideal for the spread of deadly diseases.
Let me talk to you about what this session... But it's stating the obvious to say that the impact of the conflict on health is catastrophic. More than 17,000 people are reported to have died in Gaza, including 7,000 children. And we don't know how many are buried under the rubble of their homes. More than 46,000 injuries have been reported. 1.9 million people have been displaced, almost the entire population of the Gaza Strip, and are looking for shelter anywhere they can find it. But nowhere and no one is safe in Gaza. There are worrying signals of epidemic diseases, including bloody diarrhea and jaundice, and there have also been reports of high levels of diarrheal diseases and respiratory infections. The risk is expected to worsen with the deteriorating situation and approaching winter conditions. Gaza's health system is on its knees and collapsing. Only 14 hospitals out of the original 36 are even partially functional. A ceasefire is the only way to truly protect and promote the health of the people of Gaza. I deeply regret that the Security Council was unable to adopt a resolution on such a ceasefire last Friday.
In Gaza, the trend of fatalities continue to rise, placing a tremendous burden on the already weakened health system. The largest proportion of fatalities recorded were among children, 45%, and women, 30%. Save the Children, by end of October, reported that the number of children killed in the 3 weeks following 7 of October surpasses annual number of children killed in conflict zones since 2019. From 30 November, there has been a sharp increase in overall daily fatalities.
We're going to take a quick break right now. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back from the break. Coinciding with Food, Agriculture and Water Day at COP28 in Dubai, campaigners raised awareness about what they termed water injustice in Gaza, more than 2 months into the war between Israel and Hamas. In a statement, campaigners called for an end to water apartheid in the Strip, condemning Israel's weaponization of water during the conflict. Israel initially severed all water supply to Gaza after October 7, but claims it has restored it in southern areas by reopening lines that provide 28.5 million liters of water a day. Israeli military officials insist there is enough available water and other supplies for all Gazans, and they were in touch with all UN agencies to monitor the humanitarian issue.
We have mainly three key messages that we're trying to deploy in this COP and even after COP. That's our target, that we want water justice, we want to end water apartheid, and to promote that water justice is a human right. Within this climate sphere where we are negotiating climate justice, it's very hard to not mention that not having sovereignty over your resources is a big violation against climate justice and human rights.
First of all, water apartheid is a bizarre accusation to try to make. Before this war, Israel was providing only 7.7% of Gaza's water. The rest was locally sourced and treated, including from desalination plants, next to which Hamas has been firing rockets and recklessly putting those desalination plants in danger. The same desalination plants from which Hamas has, of course, been withholding the necessary fuel as it continues to sit on fuel stockpiles for its own war machine.
Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and Senator Bob Casey joined a rally against anti-Semitism at Rodef Shalom Synagogue in Philadelphia. Both Shapiro and Casey highlighted the actions students have taken across the state to denounce anti-Semitism in schools and hold leaders accountable. The comments come as University of Pennsylvania President Liz McGill, who came under fire for her stance on anti-Semitism on campus, resigned on Saturday. McGill was one of three top university presidents who were criticized after they testified at a congressional hearing on Tuesday about a rise in anti-Semitism on college campuses following the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war in October.
The darkness. In the face of these dark moments, particularly since October 7th, I've witnessed some of the best of Pennsylvania. And God bless our fellow Pennsylvanians. The vast majority of them are wonderful, caring, loving, inclusive people. And I have seen Pennsylvanians take actions big and small, and both matter, to combat anti-Semitism and to find their power. I've seen it here in Philadelphia, where students raised their voices, where students made sure they were heard in the halls of power at their university, and leadership was held accountable. The students did that.
We gather in this season of light, this season of hope. But we also gather, of course, for a very specific purpose, I should say. We gather to call out and condemn the evil, the horrific evil of anti-Semitism. That's where we gather. I said from October 7th, 2023, incidents of anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, and assault are reported to increase by 388%, as Michael made reference to. That's just in a less than a 3-week period. 388% increase over that period. Then I went on in the letter to say, disturbingly, many of these reports have come from students on college campuses who describe witnessing anti-Semitic graffiti and vandalism, and from being subjected to virtual harassment and violent threats.
Members of an Israeli community which was devastated in the attack by Hamas on October 7th gathered to mark Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights. The residents marked the occasion by lighting candles and enjoying music. Chen and Agam Goldstein Almog, a mother and daughter who were released hostages, addressed the gathering of displaced residents from Kibbutz Kfar Aza in Shefaim. The pair were released from Gaza last month under a temporary truce between Hamas and Israel.
So tonight we did the Chanukah lighting ceremony with all the kibbutz. Chanukah is a holiday of freedom and lighting the darkness. And we invite the hostages that were kept in Hamas hands that came back 2 weeks ago. And with them and with the families of the kidnaps that are still there in Gaza, we light the Chanukah candles. And it was really emotional, and we was really happy to see the support from all the community of the kibbutz, that have in us, Kibbutz Shfaim, and we really hope to see our lovers that's still there in the hands of the Hamas.
Thousands of people have held a demonstration in Brussels against anti-Semitism amid concern in Belgium's Jewish community over the rising number of anti-Semitic incidents in Europe since October 7. Police estimated the number of protesters at approximately 4,000. In a peaceful rally, they waved Belgian flags and held banners reading, "You don't have to be Jewish to march against anti-Semitism."
We're here by the thousands just to say one thing. We're all united against anti-Semitism and further against all racism, all kind of discrimination, wherever that could be.
There's a lot, the Jews that live here are very worried, and there's a lot of anti-Semitism acts that are happening around here since the conflict has started. And, it's to show that our society doesn't tolerate any form of racism, including anti-Semitism.
Hatred can't be a response to what's happening politically in the Middle East. There need to be political solutions to what's happening in the Middle East. Hatred between communities is the cause of the problem.
Meanwhile, more than 3,000 people attended a pro-Israeli demonstration in Berlin where a member of the German government urged the decent majority in the country to stand up against anti-Semitism. Labor Minister Hubertus Heil of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats called on Germans to become a loud majority and to act now and not later. In the week following October 7th, watchdog Rias reported 202 anti-Semitic incidents in Germany related to those attacks, a 240% increase from a year ago. Away from the war in the Middle East, officials in Ukraine say Russia attacked the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, with 8 long-range ballistic missiles before dawn today, adding that 4 people were wounded by debris after air defenses shot down the incoming artillery. The strike at around 4 a.m. marked the first major attack on Kyiv in recent months using ballistic missiles, which travel faster than drones and cruise missiles and are harder to shoot down. The National Police said in a statement that 4 people were hurt by shards of shattered glass in the Darnitsky district in southeastern Kyiv and needed medical assistance. On the outskirts of Kyiv, police and soldiers were seen investigating a massive explosion crater next to a damaged private house. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba said it would be devastating for Kyiv and the European Union if EU leaders do not give his country the green light for membership talks at a summit this week. EU leaders are meeting on Thursday and Friday to decide whether to launch membership negotiations with Kyiv and grant it 50 billion euros of economic support and how to continue military aid for Ukraine's defense against Russia's invasion. Securing new financial assistance from Europe is critical as doubts mount over future U.S. support for Kyiv, which relies heavily on Western financial aid. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who boasts about his ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin, has threatened to veto the aid and enlargement talks at the summit.
Good morning. I don't even want to talk about the devastating consequences that will occur shall the Council fail to make this decision, not only with regard to Ukraine, but in a broader sense on the issue of enlargement as a whole. As I told you, we did our homework. We expect the European Union to do its homework, and we will be talking with member states into the area of enlargement, but also beyond that area, that the European Union is unable to make decisions of historic nature and keep its promises. So I think it will be devastating for both if this happens. But you cannot stop wheels of history from turning. But I think to what has been done, but I think that the game should be played fairly. If we are told to do something and we do that, that must be registered as a result. Will be able.
Because this is not the moment to weaken our support to Ukraine. Just the contrary, this is the moment to increase it.
I think it's a clash of ideologies, of those who want Europe to be strong and those who don't want European Union at all. So if we can get rational and find rational solutions, I won't go deeper in this, but pragmatic, let's call them, maybe this step can be solved. If not, dark times can lie ahead.
This is a crucial week for Europe, and it's a question, can we rise to the challenge and overcome difficulties? In the past, we have overcome all difficulties, and I will certainly do my utmost to overcome this as well. We may have to become very creative, but here we see one of the downsides of unanimous decision-making and the power of the veto. I'm not saying that we necessarily need to change this, but we really need to think hard what our procedures are so that we don't end up in paralysis. Right now, we're not in paralysis. It's a negotiation process. This morning kicks off, I think, what will be a very intense week. Thank you.
U.S. President Joe Biden has headed back to Washington, D.C. following a 3-day star-studded fundraising trip to California. Mr. Biden has invited Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to a December 12 meeting at the White House to discuss the ongoing war against Russia and what he considers the vital importance of continued U.S. support of their defense efforts. In a statement on Sunday, the White House indicated that the two leaders would discuss urgent needs facing Ukraine. This comes as the White House looks to strike an agreement with Congress that would provide military aid for Ukraine and Israel. The Voice of America's Anna Chernikova joins us now from Kyiv. Anna, thanks for joining us. What more can you tell us regarding this attack at dawn?
Good evening. Well, definitely it was quite a tough night, not only for Kyiv, but also for Ukraine, because not only the missile attack happened, also 18 drones were launched on the territory of Ukraine, mostly south area. But if we are talking about Kyiv, well, it was quite a very dangerous attack. What I mean by that is, well, the air raid alarm was heard after the explosion. So these ballistic missiles apparently were so fast that the air defense system was able to shut it, but the air raid alarm went later. I personally woke up of the sound of explosions, and it was quite loud. At least, well, around 8-7 explosions were heard in my neighborhood. However, well, the city of Kyiv is quite protected in, well, I should say it's very protected, and normally for the past months we do not see any direct heat, but debris fall is extremely dangerous as well, especially if we're talking about this kind of missiles. And as we can see in the footage, quite a lot of damage is in place, and some residential buildings, private buildings, were some destroyed, some really heavily damaged. For people, at least for people, were wounded. It was confirmed by the Kyiv authorities. So I should say that it was quite a dangerous attack, especially, I should say, because the air raid alarm went afterwards.
And Anna, we understand the 8 long-range ballistic missiles were used, and you mentioned that there was certainly some damage to residents and homes. Are there any reports of attacks on critical infrastructure, despite the fact that there's also harsh weather conditions that everyone's dealing with?
Well, at this point, we do not have any confirmation that this attack, that there were any damage to critical infrastructure after this attack. However, of course, we do not know what was the main target. So definitely, if we look at the location of debris fall, we can see certain critical infrastructure located in that areas as well. But of course, we cannot be sure if this was the main target. If we look in general at the attacks around Ukraine, not only the capital, but also in the south particularly, or in the north, east, and west especially, we can see that the main target is definitely energy infrastructure, especially if we're talking about west part of the country. And these attacks are happening more and more recent now. So, I mean, we do not have direct confirmation, but we can, we can see that probably it could be that energy infrastructure was also one of the main targets this time. However, as I said, all missiles were shut down, so we do not know exactly the target.
Okay, and what should Ukraine be looking forward to at the European Union summit this week? Is it financial assistance or EU membership? Which is really crucial at this time?
Extremely important week for Ukraine, for sure. If we look at the not only EU question, but also US trip by President Zelensky, but coming back to EU membership and EU aid summit. Well, I should say that definitely Ukrainians expect that what was discussed would be arranged and would be put in place. So what I mean is that Ukraine had certain homework to do, and according to Ukrainian officials and also some European officials who particularly was looking at the results, preliminary result that came some time before, it looks like Ukraine succeeded in most of the tasks. At this point, again, according to Ukrainian officials, everything that was supposed to be done by this time was done. So, of course, Ukraine expects that now European Union will answer with what was discussed, that the procedure of EU membership for Ukraine would start, and this is exactly what Ukrainians expect from the summit. In addition to agreed aid that as well was discussed, was negotiated, and still under negotiation, as well as the first question. So basically, this is extremely important week, as I said, because these two questions are basically crucial questions, and Ukraine was working hard all this year, despite intensive war, in order to meet requirements. So, of course, it's expected that this would be seen and would be, the next stage of Ukraine-EU relations would start.
And Anna, we know that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has threatened to veto the aid and enlargement talks at the summit. What objections does he specifically have regarding aid for Ukraine?
Yeah, this is probably the main issue for Ukraine, Hungarian position and Hungarian, previous comments on Ukrainian case. Let's put it this way. Particularly, there were certain Ukraine-Hungary questions that, especially with the bordering regions, that apparently Ukrainian government and Hungarian government are also negotiating upon, and according to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, certain things as well have been done in order to meet particularly the most desirable requirements that Hungarian officials had for Ukraine. Again, it's more we're talking about this internal, more we're talking about this internal relations between Hungary and Ukraine, because there were certain questions from the Hungarian side regarding language issue in these bordering areas and so on and so forth. So this do not look like an issue that cannot be solved. And I don't really feel that this is something that should stop this crucial negotiation between EU and Ukraine. However, we see that, as you said, veto is possible, and this is exactly what now Ukrainian officials are trying to do is to negotiate with Hungarian counterparts, and we see a meeting by Mr. Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, with his counterpart from Hungary. And also the Minister of Defense of Ukraine today had telephone conversation with Minister of Defense of Hungary. So, it looks like it will be quite a tough negotiation, but again, these internal issues definitely have a way to be solved, but both sides should find the solution and find this middle point.
All right. Thank you very much, Anna, for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Still ahead on the program, Vatican lights up Christmas tree in St. Peter's Square. We'll have the story and more. Join us again. Welcome back. To diplomatic relations, Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet has made his first trip to neighboring Vietnam in a bid to boost ties. The leader, who took office in August this year, was welcomed by his Vietnamese counterpart Pham Minh Chinh at the presidential palace in capital Hanoi, where talks between both delegations were later held. The two sides signed memorandums of understanding in the fields of trade, diplomacy, technology, and science. Vietnam and Cambodia established diplomatic relations in 1967, with two-way trade totaling $11 billion in 2022. Vietnam is currently the largest investor in Cambodia in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Bloc A, with total registered capital of nearly $3 billion in 205 projects. And the Australian government has announced plans to halve migration intake within 2 years in an attempt to fix the country's broken immigration system. According to the country's Minister for Home Affairs, the government's targeted reforms were already putting downward pressure on net overseas migration and will further contribute to an expected decline in migrant numbers. Under the new policies, international students would need to secure higher ratings on English tests, and there would be more scrutiny on a student's second visa application that would prolong their stay. Visa rules for low-skilled workers will also be tightened under the new plan. The decision comes after net immigration was expected to have peaked at a record 510,000 in 2022 to 2023. However, it aims to slash the annual intake to 250,000, roughly in line with pre-pandemic levels by June 2025.
We are going to make sure that we bring numbers back under control, that we build a better planned system around essential things like housing, and perhaps most importantly of all, that we build a program that delivers for the national interest. But it's not just about numbers. It's not just about this moment and the experience of migration our country is having at this time. This is about Australia's future. We've got some really big national challenges that we face as a country. So we've put forward measures here that will help us bring net overseas migration back to normal in a very short time frame. They're very significant measures that we're taking here. Things like increasing the English language requirements for students, making sure that the students who are coming here are going to be able to study and going to be able to thrive in our labour market.
And stories from Africa now. The West Africa's regional bloc, ECOWAS, has set up a committee of 3 leaders to negotiate with Niger's military junta on a transition to democratic rule. A communiqué released after its annual summit says the bloc would consider easing sanctions in the event of a favorable response. Leaders of the Sunday summit held in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, were chosen from Togo, Sierra Leone, and Benin to engage the Niger junta to agree on a short transition roadmap and work towards the speedy restoration of constitutional order. Niger became the latest ECOWAS member to undergo a coup in July when soldiers from the Presidential Guard detained President Mohamed Bazoum and set up what they called a transitional government, one of a series of government overthrows in West Africa's Sahel region.
I would like to reiterate the imperative of the regions to continue to re-engage under the military rule and basis of realistic and short transition plan that can deliver democracy and good governance. No alternative. On our part, we should be prepared to provide them with technical and material support to ensure the achievement of these strategic goals. It is important that we also review some development in our sub-region, including the move by some of our members under military rule to float an alliance of Sahel states. The Phantom Pushback Alliance appears intended to divert our attention from our mutual belief for democracy and good governance that will impact the life of our people.
Based on the outcomes of the engagement by the Committee of Heads of State with the CNSP, the authority will progressively ease the sanctions imposed on Niger. Failure by the CNSP to comply with the outcomes of the engagement with the committee, ECOWAS shall maintain all sanctions, including the use of force, and will request African Union and all other partners to enforce the targeted sanctions on members of the CNSP and their associates.
We head over to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where another election is about to hold. With less than 2 weeks to go, incumbent President Felix Tshisekedi, who is running for re-election, was on the campaign trail at the weekend in Goma. Thousands of residents of the North Kivu provincial capital attended the meeting despite the rain. Felix Tshisekedi's meeting was under heavy security due to M23 rebel activity in large sections of the North Kivu province. The president promised, if voted in, to rid the country of M23 rebels, whom he accuses Rwanda's leader Paul Kagame of bringing in. And Kenyans are demanding answers after a nationwide power blackout plunged the country into darkness. This is the country's third countrywide blackout in the past 4 months. Late on Sunday night, multiple institutions, including the main airport in the capital, Nairobi, experienced a power outage that lasted several hours at 2 terminals. Many Kenyans have criticized the government as anger and frustration grows over recurring disruptions. By Monday morning, power had been restored to most of the country, except for some parts of Nairobi and the coast region. Kenya Power, the state-run power provider, says it is working around the clock to restore normalcy to other areas. And a quick check on the weather now. Heavy snow blanketed multiple regions in northern China, causing schools closures and mass transportation disruptions. In Zhengzhou, the capital of Henan province, the city's weather bureau issued a blizzard red warning in the early hours of today, warning that temperatures were expected to touch lows of -1 degree Celsius. The alarm was lifted later in the morning. According to officials, passengers were stranded at Zhengzhou's railway station after 192 train departures were canceled. Various expressways were closed, and the city shut kindergartens as well as primary and middle schools for the day. In the neighboring province of Shaanxi and Shanxi, severe snowfalls also forced the closure of several expressway toll gates. But China's capital, Beijing, welcomed the first snowfall of the year, with residents saying they were surprised and happy. And finally, on the program, the Vatican lit up its famed Christmas tree in St. Peter's Square and unveiled this year's nativity scene. The nativity scene featured life-size terracotta statues, including a depiction of St. Francis of Assisi, and was inspired by the first living nativity scene created 800 years ago by St. Francis in year 1223. The 28-meter-tall spruce donated by the northern city of Cuneo was decorated with thousands of nursery-grown white mountain flowers. Thousands gathered at the St. Peter's Square to watch the Christmas lighting ceremony. And that brings us to the end of the program for today. I'm Susan Ilian. Thanks for watching The World Today, and see you tomorrow.